All right, everyone, let's get started. Welcome to the Disciple Standard Podcast. We've got a great show for you today. Have a fantastic interview with Jean Gomes, and then for the topic, we're going to be talking about the tipping point. What does that even mean? Let's get started. All right, everyone, the topic for today is actually called the tipping point. Jake, the second segment of our show where we, go over all the new disciples, we call that the tipping point. But have you ever wondered why we call it the tipping point?
Not really. I just kind of thought it was a cool name that you came up with because it's the tipping point about middle of the way through the episode.
Yeah. Okay, but there's more to it than that. It's
Awesome.
Not just that we're at the middle of the episode. There's actually kind of a thought behind it, which I'd like to share with everyone. And here, let's just work our way through this. So kind of, the underlying premise is that if you really want to change the world, then just start by discipling 2 people this year. I mean, that's, in 222 Disciple and the Disciple Standard, this is what we're advocating, that every person would just disciple 2 people. And take your time, slow down, help them to become mature, reproducing Christians who can join you in the movement. And then the second year, all 3 of you who are in the movement would go out and find 2 more people. And so in the second year, there'd be 9 people in your movement. And everyone take the time to really slow down, help people understand the gospel and become mature in their Christianity and learn how to reproduce this mission. In the third year, if all 9 went out and each one found 2, you'd be at 27. And then by year 4, it'd be 81. And, as it starts kind of slow. But then as it gets going, it's interesting because it only takes 20 generations to reach half the population of planet Earth. At the 20th generation, you're at 3.5 billion people. And so presumably in the 21st generation, okay, you've reached the world for Christ. And, I always say when we do that there's obviously, it's kind of like more of a mental exercise. Maybe it won't exactly happen like this. But this is like a model for thought about how would we reach the world for Christ? Don't try to do it through addition, like just one person at a time. Instead, do it through multiplication, this kind of exponential growth. And I think that's the model of the early church, and it's the disciple standard that we're arguing for. Anyway, there's all these sociological discussions about, okay, when do movements really get going? How do you know when they've gotten traction? And so there's this sociological phenomenon called a tipping point where you have this movement and you reach a certain point and after that, it's unstoppable. And if you were to take to the internet or find books and start reading about the tipping point, you'll find that people, they have various different definitions. I mean, some people say, boy, by the time you get to 10, 12% of your goal, you've crossed over the tipping point and the rest is downhill sledding. There are other people who think it's about 20%. As I read through, kind of the most conservative estimate is that it's somewhere between 35 and 40%. So if you have this goal and you're working your way through it, by the time you're about 35 to 40% of the way through, you're actually starting the downhill slope. This is now an undeniable movement that's just going to take off and go. Well, anyway, if you think about this sort of exponential movement, then 35 to 40% of the way through is between 7 and 8. So in Generation 7, there's 2,187, and in Generation 8, then 6,561. And I really, when it comes to, where is the tipping point? I really like this because there's a number that, I don't know if it's just corny or what, but the number 2,222 is right in there. And I've thought to myself, okay, if in our lifetime we can just get to 2,222 people who are committed to making disciples and multiplying this mission, if we can get to that 2,222 number and everyone's kind of on mission together, then wow, we can see the renewal of the church. We can see, this could be a whole new revival or a whole new world movement of Christianity. And, I think there's just something about that. And so to a certain extent, the reason that we're taking time to always quantify our movement in the middle section, the tipping point, is because we're heading toward a tipping point. Hopefully, we're kind of on a journey to this 2,222. Anyway, what I think is interesting, of course, right now, we'll announce this in the second segment that we've now crested over 700 people. We're just kind of finishing the sixth generation. We're heading up on that seventh generation. And I think it's also interesting, if you were to go to our website, we actually, it's something that we've done is we've helped people to just be able to see this kind of generationally. At the very top, there's me, and then the people that I've discipled, and then there's a line, and then there's the third generation, the people that my disciples have discipled, and there'll be another line, and there's a fourth generation of people they've discipled, and a fifth generation, and then finally a sixth generation. And then at the very bottom, right here, just you see it with my mouse now, there's 3 people in the seventh generation down. So this is undoubtedly, we've got this exponential movement going because we've got to the seventh generation already. And, these 3 people, I don't know them. The first is Lisa Colin, and here we can put it on the screen. I discipled Tricia Bosma. Tricia discipled Elaine May. Elaine discipled Laura Koning. Laura Koning discipled Laura Posthumus. Laura Posthumus discipled Gail Biker. And then Gail Biker has been discipling Lisa Colin. And I assume hopefully that she'll take someone on. We'll start an 8th generation. But this is one of the first toeholds we have in the 7th generation. Also, Patrick Caldwell. So I discipled Brian Bosher, who discipled Chad Skur, who discipled Tony Lauder, who discipled Jacob Bohr, who discipled Henry Isis, and now Patrick Caldwell. And then one more, Sue Van Dyken, and again, it's Scott to Brian, and then Brian to Judy, and then Don Bauman, and then Rachel Pickart, and then Deborah Bossenbrook, and Sue Van Dyken. Anyway, to just kind of go back to the numbers, so to speak, and this whole idea of the tipping point, we are now just having the first few people entering the 7th generation. As we're crossing, we're very near now, 729. And so we can just see that we're starting to push toward that. I think of it as almost like a magical number of 2,222. Because, boy, if in our lifetime we can just see this movement get to 2,222, and, I say in our lifetime, but this is actually the way it's working here, may only be, a short time away. Boy, we have an army of 2,222 people, all of whom are committed to reach 2 people, to train those people to reach 2 people, to train those people to reach 2 people. I can really see how, this becomes a movement that just, who knows where God might bring it. And so anyway, beyond the fact that the tipping point's always in the middle of the show, that's the idea. Any thoughts, Jake?
Yeah. For one, didn't know a lot of that. I didn't know there was an actual, like you said, sociological term called the tipping point, which I think was really cool. But even more, I think like seeing that we're so close to it, and it doesn't seem like a big number, like 2,222 doesn't seem like that big compared to 3.5 billion people.
Right.
And I'm like, we got this. I think this is fantastic movement. I think we're onto something.
Yeah. And I guess I think about it this way. Jesus, after his resurrection, he gathered 11 disciples and he said, go make disciples of all the nations. You 11 people, which might have seemed like so overwhelming. And now in our day, like, okay, there's, 7 billion people who live on planet Earth. Like, okay, go reach. How would we ever do that? Well, we're not going to do it through addition. We're going to do it through exponential growth and multiplication. And it's the disciple standard. How'd the disciples do it? They reached people who reached people. Paul's point, the things you've heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, Timothy, and trust reliable people who will be qualified to teach others, who will teach others, who will teach others. And this is the way Christianity works. And anyway, I think this is exciting. Become one of the first 2,222 people. be part of this, the foundation of this movement. So if you're listening in and we've perked your attention, would love to hear your thoughts, your comments. I love if you've been listening for a while and you've been thinking about joining, for you to just take the step, become a part of this movement. I think this is something God is really, clearly he is using. It's fun to be a part of. It's exciting to see how God multiplies his kingdom. And so anyway, that's a topic for today. And so now we get to the middle part of our show called The Tipping Point. Let's go. All right, for The Tipping Point this week, we are pleased to welcome 9 new disciples. And again, if you listen week by week, you always know that this is a movement, a multiplication movement. And week by week, there's always new people to add. This week, we get to welcome Louis de Kruijder and Nathan Steensma, both of whom are being discipled by Jean Gomes. And we're going to actually have an interview with Jean coming up. Going to be really great. Also, David Derby, welcome, being discipled by Eric and Lori Stewart. Dave Anderson, being discipled by Josh Zettler, Rich Mulder by Brian Bosher. Kathy Ramirez by Lori Woodward. Elias Bayona by Corey Sullivan. Phi Inglesman by Austin Cameron. And Jody Peters by Bob Crow. So to each of our new disciples, welcome. And to each of the disciple makers, just great job. Thank you for giving of yourself to this noble cause. And a special congratulations to Lori Woodward, who now has a total of 10 disciples and descendants. And so her network has grown to 10. Lori, a great job. It's fantastic to see how God's just multiplying your efforts as you're making disciples. So congratulations. Everybody, we've now crested over 700 people. We're now at 706 total disciples made and growing. All right, that's wonderful. Let's keep up the good work. On to the next segment, Ordinary People. So I'd like to welcome to the show my friend Jean Gomes. Jean, actually, we first met through a mutual friend, Carl Bosma. And since that time, you've gotten involved in 222 Disciple through one of my disciples, Bob Crow. And I'd like to just welcome you to the show, and thanks for being here.
Hi, Scott. Hi, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be with you, and thanks for having me. It's a great privilege to talk to you again. It's been a long time.
It
long
has.
time no see, and great to be with you, and also with Jake.
Yeah,
my twin. My twin.
You guys are twins. Now, here's where I'd like to start. You have, I think, just a wonderful story of how you came to Christ. I wonder if you might just share that for everyone who's listening.
All right. I was born and raised in a very nominal Roman Catholic family. So I am from Brazil.
Yeah.
So nice to meet you. Brazil here. In Brazil, back in the day, 30 plus years ago, I would say 70% of the population were born and raised Roman Catholic. The situation is changing a little bit. So I was part of that tradition. Basically go to church once a year.
Okay.
If that's something positive.
Yeah.
And then my mom, she registered me in a catechism classes in order to get First Communion. So I was 11 years old. So I went through the catechism classes. I didn't believe in anything related to religion. I was a practical atheist. But I went through. My mom required. And for us in Brazil, there's something weird regarding religion. Doesn't matter if you believe or not. You still perform the rituals.
Okay.
Which in U.S., we have some stuff like that too. The guys going to some rituals, church, they just don't believe anything about it. So that was my case. I was learning the Lord's Prayer, the Ten Commandments, the Apostles' Creed. I was praying to Mary and stuff like that, but didn't believe anything. I think the apex of my skepticism about that was when I was confessing to the priest. It was actually the bishop. And the bishop started to ask a lot of things about my sins, and I started to confess my sins, which I believed back in the day they were sins. And then he was basically saying, okay, I listened to you now, bow down to your knees and pray 14 Pater Nosters, which is the Lord's Prayer, to in front of the cross. And there was the body of Christ in the cross, and I was praying 14 times the same prayer. And then after that, 13 times the Ave Maria, which is the Hail Mary.
Yeah.
And then when I was at the fifth prayer, I was just so bored. I was just so annoyed. And I was like, that doesn't work. I'm not feeling like forgiven. I'm not feeling welcomed by this statue. So that was just nonsense. That was strange. So I pretend I finished the prayer. I was just moving my lips. And then I went back to the bishop, and the bishop said, yep, you're forgiven. You're free. Go back tomorrow, and then you receive First Communion.
Okay.
And then that was my first experience with religion. So I went back the next day. I took First Communion. I was really curious about the transubstantiation kind of thing.
Oh, you were waiting to see what might happen.
What might happen here with this piece of bread, but nothing really happened. So I was very frustrated. And then I left the church. So I was 12. I was very curious about knowing stuff, but that was my last experience with the church. And then I left, and I continued my own journey as like a practical atheist. I was just mocking religious people, and my mom just got converted to a Protestant church, very Pentecostal, speaking in tongues.
Okay, yeah.
At home, so that was like a mess. Our life was a messy life. And then I was 14, so 3 years after, perhaps. And then I broke my arm. I was a basketball player. I have the scars here to this day. So I got stuck in the bench for 1 year. And during this time, a friend of mine invited me to go to his church. And besides the fracture here, I lost my stepfather. He committed a crime, and he was put into prison.
Oh, wow.
And then he didn't resist and had a stroke and passed away. That was nasty. I mean, it's hard to tell the story so long in a very short. So I was devastated. I couldn't play basketball, which was my passion. And I could see my stepfather. So I was really bad. I was in bad shape emotionally. And this friend of mine invited me to go to church, and he gave me a ride because I had the broken arm. I couldn't take a bus or whatever. So he gave me a ride, and I went to the church. And there, for the first time, I listened to someone who presented the gospel with clarity, confronting my sin, not with moralism, with legalism, but with the Savior.
Yeah.
And that made total sense to me. He was preaching from the Psalm 73. I mean, why do the good people suffer and the bad people just enjoy life as if nothing bad was happening with them? And then he presented the destiny of the wicked. He presented the destiny of those who are justified by Christ, and why life makes sense for those who believe in Christ. And that totally made sense to me. It clicked. And I went back to the church next Sunday. And after 3 years, I was in the seminary getting ready to be one of the pastors of that church.
So somehow it was quite dramatic, because once it clicked and made sense, you felt the calling into ministry, and within a very short time, you found yourself in seminary preparing to become a pastor.
Yeah. Especially because of one guy. His name is Pedro, which is Peter in English. Pedro was one of the pastors at the church, and he discipled me. The way he discipled me was very organic, was not formal. I mean, I needed a ride to go home, and I had no money to get a bus or ticket.
Okay.
So he used to give me a ride to my home, and along the way, I was just throwing on him a bunch of questions because I was a practical atheist. So, and then I became a Christian, so I have a ton of questions. So we used to stay hours and hours in the car. I was asking questions. He was trying to give me answers. And we did that for, I think, 1 year and a half.
Yeah, which is so amazing to get a gift like that, of the power of a personal relationship, one-on-one with somebody who, okay, you're getting all your questions answered, and that made a big difference in your life then.
Absolutely. And then his life was such a model to me that I was persuaded by God that if I want to become a pastor, I would do something similar to what He has done with me. I mean, going one-on-one to people and disciple them. So that's what I did. I graduated from the seminary, and I was 22. And I mean, there's some weird stuff. We're switching gears to my own story as a pastor. But in my denomination, they were pretty strict with new candidates for the ministry because they had a very dark past in terms of candidates who just stepped down. So in order to become ordained, they asked me to plant a church first.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so with 18 years old, I was in the seminary, and they asked me to plant a new church in a neighborhood. They had a building, they had everything. They just didn't have people.
Okay.
And then my job was to bring people to the building. And so I was 18 years old. I just converted to Christ with 14 years old, and that was just terrifying. It was a very poor community. I was basically knocking the doors of each person. It was like slum. Very poor, very poor. So I was knocking door by door, talking to the children, just inviting them to come over on Sunday. And after 3 years, we planted a church there, 100 plus people, and that was a miracle. I cannot tell how I did it to this day.
Now, talk a little bit about you became a pastor, and I know that you had this model of discipling people and carrying on personal relationships, which really caused your ministry to find some success in Brazil. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your experience in discipling people while you were a pastor in Brazil.
Right. Well, what I used to do, and I used to tell my folks in my church now, I always look at the visitor or the newcomer with like coach eye.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy one day can become my co-worker. Sometimes we have a very central or incubated vision. We just look for our own members and our own folks. My mindset from the beginning, because I was an outsider, I was always trying to look for those guys who are visiting our church, especially unbelievers with so many problems.
Right.
And I was trying to look at them and ask God, please open the heart of that person and make that person one of my co-workers. So I was always praying like that. And all of a sudden, God was starting to send me some weirdo guys, like weed smokers, skateboarders, basketball players, guys, sexual offenders, girls with eating disorders. I mean, the list was long. And at first, I mean, I had the guys from the church who were pretty nice people. I mean, the sons and daughters of the elders and the deacons, like pretty normal people. They don't do scandals.
Right.
And I was trying to disciple those guys. They were just not interested. Nah, we just want to do our normal stuff. We don't want to do discipleship. And then I went to these crazy people, and then I started to disciple them. And guess what? From them, I started to see a lot of fruit. And because these guys come from the world, they come from a life controlled by Satan. When they get free, when they experience freedom in Christ, freedom to obey Christ, freedom to have an intimate relationship with Christ, I think when they as soon as they realize that, they go back to their friends and try to reach them to Christ too. And that's what started to happen. From a group of 5, 7 folks that I was discipling, all of a sudden we have 30 because they're just bringing them over. And as they bring them over, oh my word, the church started to experience some problems because they come with their cigarettes, they come with their skateboards, they come with their crew. They have weird faces. We're not used to that. So that was a very nice experience for the church. We sense a renewal, and we become a mission-centered church. So we're now looking outside, not only from the inside. And so I disciple, like, in a period of 7 years, around 100 people. And these 100 disciple more and more and more. So from a 300 member church, we turned to like 1,000 plus. And that was through discipleship, basically.
Yeah.
And I was basically doing like one-on-one, sometimes 2-on-2. Sometimes depending on the necessity. I mean, I was just one. I was doing 3, but we're just trying to teach the gospel to these folks and multiply as soon as we could. I remember, for instance, one guy. This guy is like a atomic bomb. Rogerio, that's his name. I discipled him. I spent 4 months with him, and all of a sudden, the guy was discipling 10 people.
Wow.
And he's a pastor now of our congregation in Brazil, and the guy is just an unbelievable multiplier. He was a businessman before, and he left his business, dedicated himself totally to the ministry, and now the guy is just a great fruit. I spent 4 months. Now he's spending years with other folks, and I mean, there's so many stories, but
yeah,
we can talk about them too.
Well, I think, let's kind of move the story forward. At some point or another, I think you felt called to pursue some further academics, which is what brought you to the United States. You came to pursue a PhD. I know you've now written a book of theology that's become very successful. But now in the meantime, God sort of rearranged your life, and you've now become a pastor of discipleship in Byron Center, Michigan. So talk a little bit about this whole transition and what's happened in your life.
Yeah, at first you would say, well, this guy working as lambs and preaching the gospel to the skateboarders and punks all of a sudden became a PhD. What the heck is happening?
Yeah.
And really, I was a preacher. I loved to preach. That was always my passion. So I went to the seminary back in 2008 or 2009, and I hated those disciplines like church administration, church polity. I just couldn't take them. It's so boring. I just loved preaching. So I nailed all the classes on preaching, all the sermon, the practicum. I love that. New Testament, Old Testament, systematic theology. Those disciplines were my elected.
Okay.
I love those, and I dedicated 100% to those. And those disciplines that I just thought we have an expression in Portuguese. When you're done with a topic, you just want to keep talking about it. We say, we're filling in the sausage. It's just garbage. It's not something relevant. So I was just filling the sausage in the school. I just wanted to study the Old Testament, the New Testament, the preaching, and systematic theology. So what I did, I graduated from the seminary, and I was invited by the same school to become a prof in the department of preaching because they needed another one.
Okay.
And that I started doing that once a week, and I ended up being a prof in the school for years. And then all of a sudden, I realized God was not only calling me to be a pastor in a local church, preaching, doing discipleship, and planting new churches. I received also a calling to teach this stuff and how to teach theology from the church perspective.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Because we are very used to teach theology from a very dry academic perspective. So I was just bringing, this is how you apply this text to the church. This is how you apply this truth. I mean, you're talking about systematic theology's doctrine. This is how you apply it to people out of the bounds, so to speak. And so I started to do that in the school, and I really felt compelled to do that as a divine calling. And then one day I was teaching in 2 schools. In one school that I was teaching, Servo de Cristo, like Christ the Servant, Professor Carl Bosma was one of the profs there. He used to come once a year to the school to teach Old Testament and New Testament. I was the coordinator of that course.
Okay.
It's how to preach Christ from the Old Testament, basically. So he was teaching there. I was coordinator of his course. And the guys paid for his flight, paid for everything. And then all of a sudden, he called me when he was in Brazil and said, "Hey, are you supposed to pick me up in the airport?" I say, "No." "Who are you?" "I'm Professor Carl Bosman. I'm supposed to stay in Brazil for a couple of weeks, and nobody picked me up in the airport." Say, "Well, if nobody show up, I will show up." And then I went there. I was living close by the airport. Pick him up. "So now, where's your hotel?" "I don't know." "Well, so stay at home." And then I hosted him for 7 days in my house. I think it was a miscommunication happened between the conference he was going to lecture and the school he was going to teach. So I basically hosted in my home. And then from that on, I guess you know the end of the story. He basically convinced me to apply to study at Calvin. He said, I will help you. And so I was there, very happy in the local church.
Yep.
Growing church, very disciple-oriented church. I was happy teaching at school, and I just didn't want to change. I was very comfortable where I was. And my English was poor. I had no English. I never spoke English in my life. I just had some reading skills. And say, that would be very hard to learn a new language and stop doing what I'm doing. I just don't want to do it. But he was he was insisting. Then I started, okay, I will pray about it, and then I'll reach you back. I'll get back to you. And then I start praying, and my wife praying with me, my senior pastor, everybody, and we thought that was the right moment. I was working like almost 7 to 8 years in the local church. I think that was a good moment to stop a little bit and review my life. And then I accepted the challenge. I started studying in English, and then I applied to Calvin, and I passed. I have no idea how. Because I didn't pass TOEFL and I didn't pass GRE, which are the two exams they require. But I had very good letters of recommendation.
Okay.
So that's how I ended up at Calvin Seminary. And so long story short, the program takes 5 years. I was very on a rush. So I just want to finish in 3.5. And which I did. Because I want to go back to Brazil and resume my ministry. Because I was just sick, homesick here. Because the PhD is nice, you learn a bunch of new stuff. But for a pastor, for a guy who loved the ministry so passionately, I just want to go back and keep up with my people.
Understand.
So I had the funding raise for a new church planting project. I had the people, I have a group of elders wanted to go with me, and we had a place to start a church plant, and I got even a rent place for me to live for the first year. So I was set up. And then I realized my wife was pregnant, and the little baby was diagnosed with a heart defect. And then we were terrified and devastated because all our plans were up in the air. All of a sudden, in November last year, and then the doctors asked us to stay for 3 years. And then, as you might know, I just start to pulpit supply like crazy, looking for a call because I had to survive here, and I had to find a new visa, and I had to provide for my family. So I started to pulpit supply, and I realized the churches in Grand Rapids area are not in a good shape. And every time I preach in a church, I would ask my wife, so what'd you think about this church? We're thinking it would be nice if I asked them if they're interested in calling me to be their pastor. And then she was like, I don't think it's a good idea. That church is dying. You want to be like an undertaker? So I was very, very like frustrated. So I kept pulpit supplying. All of a sudden we found through Professor Carl again, the guy's always used by God to bless me. He was at First Byron CRC. They were starting over a process to find a pastor of discipleship. And then Carl clicked me with the search team, and then after 2 months, I received the call. So that was a blessing. And there I'm working right now.
Yeah, that's great. Now, let's talk a little bit about 222 Disciple, because at some point, Carl connected you and I, and then we started thinking about, is this something, because we have another friend from Brazil who is part of 222 Disciple. Is there a possibility of translating the entire program into Portuguese and how that might be used in Brazil? So we started talking, and then in the meantime, you started being discipled by Bob Crow through 222 Disciple. And I know you guys have been working together for, a few months anyway, and now you've taken on this new position as a pastor of disciple making, and you're using 222 in your ministry. So just talk a little bit about your experience with 222 Disciple.
I would say the key for this is Bob. First of all, Bob and I were good friends, and I was living in a roller coaster, honestly, because our son just passed. And so he lived 32 days. And throughout the process, Bob was with me, discipling me. And every lesson was not only about the lesson, but about the disciple making process of having a master just praying for you all the time. And he was a true friend. And every time with Bob actually was one of the best moments in my week. And I'm talking here, I mean, it's a pastor. It's a pastor. And Bob is not a pastor. But he shepherded me in a very remarkable way. And so we started in December. And we're now 4 months together. Bob is a true friend. And he told me, Jean, as soon as you think you're ready to go start discipling others, go ahead. And I'll be glad to help you out. And so I was digging through the 222, paying attention to the method, the importance of one-on-one, and basically trying to replicate what Bob was doing with me, with others. So first thing I did when I started to work in the church, I started in March, beginning of March. My first sermon, at the end of the sermon, I just asked 2 questions. If you're a believer and you want to be discipled, talk to me. And if you're a non-believer and you're here, or you think you're a believer but you're actually a non-believer, you have no idea what Christianity is all about, talk to me. I want to disciple you. And if you are a believer, a strong believer, and you are mature in your faith, but you want to become a disciple maker, talk to me. So I basically make 3 challenges. And all of a sudden, people started to show up. I mean, guys wanted to start a Bible study. Moms working with daughters with eating disorders now. I have people working with construction guys, discipling construction guys, folks dealing with the business or the markets, financial advisors, guys working with pornography. I mean, a ton of people reached me out, and we need your help. And among those, I was asking God's wisdom to remember 222, and the things you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable people who also be qualified to teach others. I memorized the verse.
You certainly have.
And then I was trying to look for those qualified people.
Yeah, the reliable people.
Yeah, those reliable people. I need God, send me those reliable people because I want to train them, and these guys will multiply. And that's what I started to do. And I found some, and the process was pretty organic. I was in the church, and these guys talked to me, say, I am interested, let's start this. Others who would come to the church, they're newcomers. One of the guys in my group now is a recent believer. He was an unbeliever. He didn't know he was an unbeliever. He never prayed in his whole life. Never read the Bible. Now I'm teaching him how to pray and answering his questions. Half of our discipleship is basically answering the questions he has. And then we have the last, and then we have the moment together. But it's been awesome. The experience with 222 Disciples has been awesome because I have a platform, I have a curriculum, and I have the environment one-on-one to train these guys to multiply. And we go slow. That's something that is so powerful about this. We are not in a rush. We're not trying to make it happen through our strength. We're relying on God, asking for Him to send us the reliable people. We will train them, and we will respect the time. We're going to a slow pace, and we will invest our time in one person, and hoping God will use that person to reach others. So that's what I'm doing. I have around 7 people doing one-on-one. I have 2 in the afternoon today. I had 1 yesterday, and I mean, I know there's some confidentiality, but I'm just impressed by what God is doing throughout the lives of these folks. And I sense God is doing the same thing He did with me in Brazil. He's sending to me guys who are kind of pushed to the corner in their own churches. And they're coming to me. Somehow they look at me, a broken man. Yeah, broken man discipling other broken men and women would be a good idea. So that's what I'm doing. So I'm thrilled to do that. And the experiences have been great so far.
That's fantastic. Jean, thanks so much. I'm completely inspired by your story and just thrilled that you've joined our 222 movement. And I'm really, praying for you and praying for your disciple making. And anyway, looking forward to what God's going to do in and through this ministry in years to come. So thanks so much for joining us. All right. And to everyone who's listening, thank you for joining us again. Another great episode. We'll see you next week. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in to the Disciple Standard Podcast. We're so glad you joined us. We encourage you to continue the conversation by joining us on social media. Also, if you want to learn more about the Multiply method or learn about how to take the Multiply pledge, we encourage you to join us on our website at multiply222.com. Have a great day.